Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse, and today we will be going over and giving our thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. First part of this video will be completely spoiler free, and then later in the video I will give you all a spoiler warning before I touch on some spoilery things like the post-credit scenes, as I do want to touch on that stuff as well. And to really just start it all off, I will not be surprised in the slightest if a lot of fans of Marvel and the MCU rank or put this movie in their top 5 MCU movies of all time, alongside the likes of Infinity War or Endgame or whatever is on your list. This movie, for me, cemented the fact that the Guardians trilogy is the best trilogy in the MCU to date. And honestly, it isn't very close for me either, other than maybe the Captain America movies, but that's mainly just because of Winter Soldier. And if I'm being completely honest, this movie felt extremely refreshing to watch, especially after seeing the last Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, and that movie being a completely disappointing beginning to the new phase, and the recent sort of hit or misses that Marvel has had. I was honestly very worried going into this movie that it would end up being yet another miss for them, and that it would end up just completely killing any excitement for the MCU for myself, but it did the exact opposite of that. It sort of revived that excitement for me, and it basically took away my MCU fatigue and disinterest that I have been having. And if you have been having that same sort of fatigue or disinterest, then I honestly highly recommend going to see this movie, as I do feel like it will bring back that interest and love for the MCU that everyone used to have as a whole in the past. It really felt like a quality original Marvel movie, as it gave that same sort of feeling that the older movies that came before what was after Endgame and Infinity War would give you. Guardians 3 was a huge step up for this phase's beginning, but then again that isn't really saying much, as it's only the second movie of this phase, and we started off with a rather disappointing first movie as well. But I would definitely say that I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, maybe even loved it to an extent. Obviously it wasn't perfect, but which movie or show can really be perfect? But it was absolutely in that category of being pretty good and very enjoyable, entertaining, funny, and emotional. It had a bit of everything in it, and the perfect amount of everything as well. When it comes to the MCU, there's often tons of really bad, cheesy, and corny jokes getting thrown around that make you just think to yourself, what was that? But James Gunn, the actors along with him, and the Guardians trilogy as a whole now has always had that sort of comedy that is actually funny and not the typical cheesy stuff we usually get like in the Thor movies. Every single joke in this movie honestly hit on the spot and made me and the entire theater laugh. We even got the first ever F-bomb in the MCU in this movie, which I'm sure some of you will be excited about. There were honestly very few things in this movie that I genuinely did not like, and I honestly don't have anything negative to say about this movie really, as the good and the enjoyable things absolutely outnumbered everything else. The emotion in this movie was pretty intense, and there were multiple scenes and instances throughout the movie where it would have you teary-eyed or crying, and that goes along with the immense storytelling that they did with all of that, especially for Rocket. And speaking of him, he was definitely the standout of this movie for me. Learning so much more about his character and backstory was really interesting, impactful, and emotional. When it comes to all of the other characters, they did a really good job with making each member of the team feel important and even more impactful than they have done before, especially with Drax and Mantis, as those two have often had that stigment of being the two stubborn members that don't do too much, but in this movie they really changed that. Drax wasn't just the big strong idiot that he often is portrayed as, he had his own special role and a lot of development in his character overall, personality and worth as well. And the same goes for Mantis and even Nebula. Gamora being a part of this movie was great as well, but I do wish we got a little more of her character in it, but this new version of her was handled really well, and she felt like a completely different person, which is obviously good, as this Gamora is from a different universe or time period. Now, I will say there is one character that I had some issues with and was slightly disappointed with, and that would be Adam Warlock. The disappointment doesn't come from the performance appearance, design, or anything like that. It was mainly just from his overall interactions with the characters and the entire story for this movie, as he sort of was just on and off, showing up and then leaving, and then not really contributing much to the final act or anything like that, other than just being a brand new character for the films. I definitely think that he will get more development in the future, especially if they end up going towards the Annihilators route, now that the Guardians have had their final movie. I also thought that Will Poulter did a good job while performing as this version of Adam Warlock. With a superhero story, you have to have the antagonist and supervillain, and the villain that was introduced to us in this movie was the High Evolutionary. And with the High Evolutionary, I can confidently say that we got one of the most menacing and evil villains in the MCU to date. His backstory with Rocket, his emotional performance, and his motives and everything that we see he has done and is planning on doing was very evil, genuinely cruel and menacing, and as part of the audience watching this movie, you will definitely grow a genuine dislike for him and for his actions and behavior. And Chuck Woody Iwuji did an absolutely amazing job playing the character. We all know that the MCU has also had some recent issues with visual effects and CGI quality, but this movie looked great visually and there were absolutely zero nitpicks from myself when it comes to CGI or visual aesthetics or anything like that. But then again, I often don't pay too much attention to CGI unless it's obviously bad. The action in this movie was also another great part of it. The different power sets, choreography, slow-mo action sequences, and everything in between, all of that was done wonderfully. And this movie had some of the best action scenes from the Guardians movies and the MCU as a whole. Now that I have sort of got all of my initial spoiler-free thoughts out of the way, and I don't want to overly repeat myself with them, I want to touch on some of these spoilers as well. So if you have not seen the movie, this is your spoiler warning now. There were so many close calls in this movie, nearly losing Rocket and then nearly losing Star-Lord. All of these moments had me tearing up, even from just the beginning of the movie. There was an actual threatening outcome for each of the heroes and it felt like we could lose any one of them at any given moment, and that stuff really pulled on my heartstrings. As did Rocket's backstory and all of the flashbacks that we got of him. Seeing him being created, mistreated, betrayed, and tortured by the High Evolutionary was so emotional, and seeing him develop and heal throughout this movie was amazing. Finally freeing himself and letting himself go and escape his past was great characterization and storytelling. Even getting a small little cameo appearance from Yondu was pretty emotional as well, and that also really helped with the development of his successor, Kraglin, who himself had his own larger and more important role in this movie as well. So did Cosmo, and it was really cool to see more of those two characters. The ending to this movie was pretty heartfelt and very wholesome. Seeing each member of the Guardians deciding to go on their own path to find happiness and retribution was really cool, and a great way to end off this trilogy and the Guardians franchise as a whole, as it was the final Guardians movie. Now, I obviously think that we will be getting more of those characters, but in a different way, and I think I may have an idea of what may be next for some of them, which brings me to the post-credit scenes. As there were two different post-credit scenes, now they weren't anything huge or major, hinting at big threats or the future of our characters, but I do want to talk about them a bit. The first one involves Rocket, now the new leader of the Guardians, or now what is likely to be a new team, alongside Groot, who resembles that of a King Groot sort of look, as well as Adam Warlock and a young girl that came from the High Evolutionary's experiments, and I believe that she has his power set as well. This kid could also end up being a part of the Young Avengers, which have been hinted at a few times now in the MCU. I think that this is obviously a hint that we will be seeing more of them as their own new team now, but I also think that these guys and their newly formed team will end up being the team known as the Annihilators, a more cosmic version of the Guardians of the Galaxy that was formed in the comics after Star-Lord realized that he and his team needed more powerful teammates and members of their family to truly defend the entire galaxy. The team consisted of the likes of Silver Surfer, Quasar, Gladiator, Gladiator, Ronan the Accuser, and Beta Ray Bill. There's obviously been multiple different iterations of the team in the comics, and we have seen them work with Adam Warlock, which makes this outcome even more likely. I do think that the team will likely be a bit different and have different members than it initially does in the comics, but I definitely think that this is the route we may be heading for these guys, and I can't wait to find out. Which brings us to the second post-credit scene, where we go back to Earth as Peter returns to his hometown to reunite with his grandfather and spend time with him, as Peter has been missing ever since he was abducted after his mother's death as a child. And at the end of this post-credit scene, the screen reads out that the legendary Star-Lord will return, which could also lead into the Annihilator stuff, or possibly even a solo movie for just Star-Lord. But other than all of that, I think that's really all I have to say. Overall, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was a very good movie, a refreshment, and a great send-off to the trilogy and the Guardians franchise as a whole, with tons of great qualities in the final movie. If I had to rate the movie, I think I would give it an 8 or 8.5 out of 10. However, I would like to hear all of your thoughts on the movie as well though, so make sure to leave them all down below. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed hearing our thoughts on this movie, don't forget to give it a like, and with that being said, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.